Good evening and welcome to our NCNW broadcast as a part of Women's Economic Empowerment Week. I am Director of Communications, Kevin Johannes. I ask that if you have a computer, you put your questions in the Q&A, which will be a drop-down menu. If you are on a website, it is on your top right, as well as the same place if you are on a mobile device. At this point, we will turn things over to our Executive Director, Ms. Janice Mathis.
Thank you, Mr. Johannes. We appreciate your taking care of our technical needs this evening, and welcome everyone. We hope you've had a great day, and we're in for some very important information. There is nothing that contributes to building wealth like home ownership, nothing that provides family stability like a good home, and we've got a bona fide expert to share with us this evening, and I confess I am very excited about it, and I know you will be too. I greet you on behalf of the National Council of Negro Women and our National Chair and President, Dr. Thelma T. Daly. Unfortunately, she could not be with us this evening because she had a funeral service to attend, but we know that she wishes us well and supports us in this and every endeavor. This webinar tonight is part of a series that we've been doing for nearly a year now, Closing the Racial Wealth Gap. And as I think about it, we may not close the gap in my lifetime or maybe even in my children's lifetime, but we can keep chipping away at it. And whether we close the gap or not, we can improve our ability to accumulate wealth and leave it to our children and their children, our successors. So we have a very special guest before I get to our main speaker for tonight, who is Congresswoman from the 5th Congressional District of Georgia. She is known for getting into good trouble. She serves in the 117th Congress on the Financial Services Committee, along with Transportation and Infrastructure. She is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Democratic Women's Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, and the LGBTQ+ Equality Caucus. She hit the ground running. She was elected president of her freshman class in the Congress, and I'm not at all surprised that Congresswoman Nikema Williams continues to be an advocate centering the needs of women and people who might be marginalized in her work on Capitol Hill. Please listen as she greets us.
Hello, everybody. I'm Congresswoman Nikema Williams, and I proudly represent Georgia's 5th Congressional District. Thank you to the National Council of Negro Women's Executive Director, Ms. Janice Mathis, for the invitation to join tonight's webinar and for personally always encouraging me and being there for me. And thank you to all of you for everything that you do to empower our communities every day. Economic empowerment, especially for marginalized communities that have long been left behind, is at the forefront of my mind each day in Congress. One of my top priorities is closing the racial wealth gap. Atlanta, my home, unfortunately leads the nation in economic inequality and lack of economic mobility. The persistent failure to prioritize access to home ownership for Black Americans has resulted in a Black-white homeownership gap that is wider today than it was in the years prior to the passage of the Fair Housing Act 55 years ago. But y'all, even bigger than closing the racial wealth gap, I believe that housing is a human right. Everyone deserves a safe, quality place to live, and I'm on a mission to make that happen. I think back to my childhood years growing up in rural Alabama. I was raised by my grandparents in a home with no indoor plumbing and no running water. We didn't have much, but I have the security of knowing that we'd always have a roof over our heads. Too many of our friends and neighbors, they lack that same peace of mind. It doesn't have to be that way. These are policy decisions. I'm a member of the House Financial Services Committee, where we're working on policies for greater financial inclusion, both through housing and addressing unbanked and credit invisible communities. Those are struggles that I know all too well. There was a time where I didn't even have a bank account, and I lived paycheck to paycheck as a public school teacher. Each month, paying rent and bills was both challenging and a major accomplishment. I did everything that I could with what I had, but much of my hard work remained invisible. Of course, if your financial history is invisible, it's pretty much impossible to get a mortgage. That's why earlier this year, I introduced and passed an initiative to make more of your hard financial work count on the pathway to owning a home. It would task lenders with considering additional data not found in a credit report when underwriting a mortgage if a consumer requested. Unlocking opportunity starts by thinking beyond what we've always done. I'm always working to unlock opportunities for affordable, desirable rental housing. Last year, the House acted to pass transformational investments in rental assistance, including $24 billion for new housing choice vouchers to support families struggling to afford their rent and help people escape homelessness and domestic violence. I'm only one member of Congress, so it takes all of us working together. The leadership and advocacy of the National Council of Negro Women will help us get closer to the reality of quality, affordable housing for everyone. I thank you for lending your voices to this movement, and I thank HUD Deputy Secretary Adrian Totman for all that you're doing to develop affordable housing and help communities thrive. I'm also grateful for the leadership of my former colleague, Secretary Marcia Fudge, who is doing transformational work to ensure that we can all achieve the promise of America. Thank you again for your advocacy to help close the racial wealth gap and make home ownership a reality, and enjoy the remainder of the webinar.
Well, that was certainly nice. I'd like to say just a few words about Deputy Secretary Adrian Todman, who is our special guest this evening, before we begin a conversation. Deputy Secretary Todman served as the CEO of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials from 2017 to 2021. During her tenure there, Deputy Secretary Todman advocated for funding and policies to preserve and develop affordable housing. Prior to her tenure there, she served as Executive Director of the District of Columbia Housing Authority, where she implemented a national award-winning model to house veterans experiencing homelessness, increase homeownership opportunities by 50% for low and moderate income families, increase the number of affordable housing units available in areas experiencing rapid growth, oversaw 12 concurrent large redevelopment efforts. Are you getting a sense that this is a woman with a lot of energy and determination? She prioritized services for youth, workforce development, and commissioned the first citywide needs assessment of public housing residents. Deputy Secretary Todman has dedicated her career to improving people's lives and strengthening communities through housing. She previously managed HUD's $500 million grant competition that focused on the redevelopment of distressed public housing. She also served as a policy aide in the Office of Public and Indian Housing. Deputy Secretary Todman believes that we have a responsibility, and you'll hear this from herself in just a few minutes, to confront housing insecurity and help ensure that most Americans have access to good homes, to eliminate all forms of housing discrimination, and to build our nation's housing infrastructure in a way that expands equity and access for everyone. As Deputy Secretary, Adrian Todman works alongside HUD Secretary Marsha Fudge to ensure that HUD has the staff and the tools it needs to provide critical support to people and to communities, including ours, across the nation. Her career in public service speaks for itself. She started out as an aide to then Congressman Ron DeLugo, a long-serving delegate representing the U.S. Virgin Islands, where Todman was born and raised. She is a graduate of the prestigious Smith College and lives in Washington, D.C. Please join me in welcoming Adrian Todman, Deputy Secretary of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That bio is long and needs to be shortened, clearly.
You know, I don't believe in that. I think people should people need to have the context and know who they're listening to. We're in the presence of greatness. What we want to do tonight, Deputy Secretary Todman, if it's all right with you, is have a conversation. We've talked about these issues. We heard Nakima Williams talk about her commitment to fair and open housing. And let's just see if we can tease out a little bit more of what you're doing and what HUD is doing. HUD has a strategic plan that lays out a vision for one HUD for all. What does that mean to the average American, one HUD for all, especially as it relates to home ownership?
Thank you for that. And let me just start by saying greetings from our fabulous secretary, Secretary Marsha Fudge, who I believe will be greeting you in weeks to come. It's been fabulous working alongside her. I learned so much. She continues to keep the department very focused in a vision that is really, captured in the concept of one HUD for all. We do a lot at HUD. I dare say a lot of folks might not be aware of the breadth of all of our work. Most people think about HUD, they may think about the work we do in public housing. They might think about the work we do in Section 8. But HUD also makes sure that our homeless brothers and sisters are able to find an apartment. HUD makes sure that if you're low income or moderate income and you want to purchase a home, the subject of tonight's conversation, that you're able to do that through FHA, the Federal Housing Administration. HUD makes sure that if you need help thinking that through and understanding your options, that we have housing counselors across the country that you are able to access to make sure you're making informed ideas. We do things like help insure healthcare facilities in neighborhoods that, but for some of our insurance, there wouldn't be access to a healthcare facility. So there's a lot that we do. And what the Secretary has done is said to us, look, we can't think about our work in a siloed way. We have to think about our work in a holistic one HUD fashion so that when we are bringing everything to bear in communities, people understand full sail everything that we do. And we have to do it for those who need it the most and those who have been perhaps cut out of access to some of our programs over years because of maybe lack of knowledge, lack of access, and maybe because of the way our programs are shaped and how we qualify folks. So we are very focused on making sure we are one HUD for everybody.
Well, thank you. That makes it a lot clearer for us. What policy choices do we need to make to assure that more Americans have access to a good home? A home provides so many advantages. There's no place like home. What do we need to do as a society, as a country, to assure that more people have access to that?
I would say we have to take a good hard look at how people are accessing our programs now and what barriers are there to accessing our programs. And so there's 4 different areas that we have really focused in on over the past year and a half or so. One, I mentioned it's important that people have knowledge. And so our housing counseling system, I consider it really our housing counseling army. I suspect underutilized. Many people may not be aware of them. You can go to our HUD website to find out where there is a HUD housing counseling apparatus near you. But it's important people just understand the process. And a lot of times people may not lean in and think, I can't do that. Maybe I can't afford it. Maybe I won't qualify. but you don't know if you don't go. And so it's really important for folks to actually go and learn. And so we've ensured that we have more funding so there's more housing counseling happening across the country. And I'm really excited by some of the things that the Congresswoman said as well that can help us with some of that reach. And then we need to have access. We know that things like student debt have created a barrier for some of our younger first-time potential homeowners. We know that some folks who are first-time homeowners and perhaps even their parents never owned a home, that being a renter, which isn't a bad thing, that is a very good thing, but being a renter, how can we make sure that your rental experience is helping you access home ownership? So one of the things that we've done is we've looked at our student loan monthly payment calculation to make sure that credit-worthy individuals and families who want to purchase a home and who are responsible with their debt payments, that they are not being unduly burdened and being left out of having their first-time home ownership dream reached because of our calculator. Something we did just today, something that we're very proud of, for first-time homeowners being able to use their positive rental history toward calculating eligibility for our insurance products. That's a big deal. Your rental, if you're a good renter and you're paying your rent on time, it is unlike your credit cards and your car loan, it's not reported to the credit agencies. And so what we're saying is that FHA, our Federal Housing Administration, will be looking at positive rental payments as something to help folks get that extra boost. And we just announced that today, and we're really excited about that. So I talked about information, I talked about access. The other thing that I think really taps out people's opportunities in terms of how homeownership can be a wealth creator is our looking at appraisal bias. Now, I don't know if folks have had an opportunity to read up in our work here, but this is really powerful. And this is something that the Secretary has been pushing us really hard on. If you live in a Black neighborhood, your home is very likely appraised at 20% less than if your home was in a white neighborhood. And when the Secretary shared that information with the president, even our president was like, we can't have that. And so he charged Secretary Fudge and he charged Susan Rice, who is the chair of the Domestic Policy Council, to come together and take a hard look at this. And so much of that work was done toward the end of last year. In February, we provided a report and a path that we can try to correct that. Well, to think about it, think about the potential generations of Black folk who have their home, making their payments, and the wealth that could have been created and passed on to their children and grandchildren was lost simply because of appraisal bias. And so that is one way that we're looking at, back to the idea that you have to have intentionality when you're thinking about your policies. That is something that we're doing very intentionally to make sure that when you purchase that home, on the back end, you are creating as much wealth as somebody who has a home in a white neighborhood.
I thank you for choosing today to make that announcement and share it here with us. That is something that has been talked about for years and years. The one thing that most people will pay is their mortgage or their rent. They will pay that. And so for that not to count in your credit score just seems like cruel and unusual punishment. Congratulations. That is a very, very big deal.
It's a big deal. We're very proud of it, but it shows to answer your question, when you're focused on making sure that you are correcting wrongs of the past, just the little things that we can do, that's a big deal across the country.
A young family member, well, two of them actually bought houses in the last 5 years or so, and both of them went through, I believe, a HUD housing counseling program as first-time homeowners. And they went over things with them like what to do about the sprinklers, what to do about your fuses and taking care of your electrical system. And so that can be very important, especially if you're maybe a single woman and you don't have a lot of mechanical expertise. We want to stop for just a minute. we try to be driven by data here at NCNW. I want to measure impact. So we have a couple of questions for the audience, and we'll just take a quick poll, and then we'll come right back to our conversation. Deputy Secretary, Mr. Johannes, can you put up the poll questions? So we see that most of our audience members are homeowners, but they also know someone who now or in the past lived in public housing. So that is, I think, a good reflection of our community, that we have had both experiences as homeowners and as those who might have needed a little bit of a boost along the way. Talk to us about community development. You already have touched on it, but how does HUD promote community development?
Right. I talked about all of the different work that HUD does that sometimes isn't transparent to folks when they think about HUD's work. I am very sure that most of the folks who are participating in today's session either went to a grocery store, visited a park, um, um, drove down a street that HUD's Community Development Block Grant Program supported. This is a bucket of funds that we receive each year that goes to states and certain of our larger and medium-sized cities to do just that kind of work, to help improve and develop our communities. And they're used in a variety of ways. We always don't get the credit. Our mayors and our governors usually go to ribbon cuttings and get the credit for some of those resources, and that's okay. But that shows you the breadth of the resources that HUD has. And we want to ensure that when these funds are being used, that they're being used in a very equitable way so that everybody can benefit. We don't want these funds being used in only certain neighborhoods. Where folks are thinking, they're going to vote for me, so I'm just going to put those funds there. We actually require the entities that receive these funds to submit to us plans on how they plan to use these funds in a very equitable way. And we also require them to have a very transparent process and hearings so that they can hear from the constituency that they serve. So all of these things are built in. But again, if we, the people, are not participating, if we're not showing up to some of those meetings and and maybe Zoom meetings like this, then we're not benefiting from the process that HUD is insisting that our local and state leaders have. So I encourage everybody, wherever they are, when you see those ads in the newspaper, you hear something on the radio, it is important to raise your voices to make sure that our taxpaying dollars, all of our taxpaying dollars, are being used in ways that are most fruitful for the people who should be benefiting from it.
Many years ago, I was a young lawyer in Athens, Georgia. And somehow we got involved with the Community Development Block Grant budget process for our city. And that grant transformed whole neighborhoods in that town by doing basic things like putting on a roof, fixing up a falling down porch. And because you had to have a title examination before you could do the work to assure that the home was indeed owned by the resident, and they had to agree that they wouldn't sell it to profiteer in less than 5 years from it, a young lawyer got some very valuable training in real estate. So it
I'm sure you did.
economic development, and it really was a foundational experience for me and my young partners. We were right out of school, but we discovered that there was a provision in the CDBG grant that allowed for some social services.
That's
So not
correct.
only did the houses get fixed up, we were able to do some parks and some daycare centers and some infrastructure improvements that improved the value of the homes. And folks are living in those homes to this day, 30, 40 years later. So excuse me for digressing.
Oh, no, 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 but that's the point. I think that these funds, and let me just say that this particular program is one of the secretaries, as a former mayor, one of the secretary's most favorite programs, because it really allows local leaders to lean in where there's a need. You mentioned childcare facilities. We all know that there is a need for really good quality childcare and good quality childcare facilities. And small businesses, this is a pot that can be used to support incubators for thriving and emerging entrepreneurs. So this is a wonderful resource that HUD provides. But again, it will only reflect the needs of the people if the people lend their voices to the process.
That is so true. Thank you so much for that. I know that many people like Section 8. I like Section 8 because you get to live in a home that's very nice and nobody knows whether you're paying for it or you're getting some assistance. It's indistinguishable from the other homes in the neighborhood. There's no stigma or anything associated with it. Talk to us about Section 8 and how it's faring, and maybe explain what Section 8 is. I shouldn't assume that we all know.
Sure. So Section 8 is simply this. People are familiar with our public housing program. It is a particular community, a particular building. That is, the building itself is subsidized. With Section 8, particularly what we call the Housing Choice Voucher Program or the voucher program, folks are able to actually go into the private rental market, find a unit that they and the landlord, like in any other private enterprise, you qualify and the landlord screens you and you're able to live there. But they're able to supplement their own the payment of their rent with their income and funds from HUD. Vouchers are usually received through working with a local housing agency. And the list, unfortunately, are very long. As you said, it's a very popular program. And the list tends to be very long for the individuals and families to access a voucher. But when you do have a voucher, you are able to pay no more than 30% of your household income. So maybe there's you, maybe there's a grown adult child who's living in the unit with you, but it's the household income, no more than 30% of the household income toward the rent. And HUD's resources, the Housing Choice Voucher Program resources, are then used to pay the balance of the rent.
I hope that in our future, there will be some means by which we can expand Section 8 and create even more of it.
But let me, if I could speak to that. So we just this is a timely conversation. Just last week, Friday, the secretary announced that the program's expanding to about by 20,000 vouchers. Now that's a small number. That's a very small number. The president has requested a much larger number, but it takes two to tango in Congress. He can propose, but Congress has to agree. And so it's a program that has grown very, very incrementally. But this expansion that the secretary announced this past Friday is the first time the program has been expanded in decades. So at least we're moving in the right direction. So that's the good news.
Thank you. That is very good news indeed. For a lot of families, coming up with the down payment to buy a home is a gargantuan task. That's harder sometimes even than coming up with the money to make the monthly payments or obtaining a good credit score. What can HUD do to assist with that down payment, that big chunk you have to put down right at the
Yeah. So we talked earlier about being intentional about policy making and making sure that we're removing barriers for first-time homeowners. And we know that this is one of the biggest barriers, is coming up with that big chunk of change for a down payment. So we've got a tool for that as well. So we have a program that's called Home, very aptly named Home, HOME, and we provide those funds to state housing finance agencies, and we also provide it to local housing departments. And they can use funds from the Home program to help families with their down payment assistance. And so this is one of those areas where if people are able to visit and learn from a housing counselor, they would be able to say to them, hey, if you go down the street to the housing department, they have this special program for first-time homeowners. 9 times out of 10, it's there's an income cap. So if it's not for everybody. It's really for folks who are moderately income. But you can get down payment assistance. That's supported by HUD resources. One of the things that the secretary is very keen on, and since the Congresswoman mentioned that she serves on the Financial Services Committee, we know that the chair of that committee, Chairperson Waters, is also very keen on, is trying to make sure that we are getting home ownership down payment assistance to not just first-time home buyers, but first-generation home buyers. And we all know what that means, a first generation home buyers. And so both of these leaders, Secretary Fudge, on the executive side, and Chairperson Waters have been very clear and very vocal about wanting to make sure that there's more down payment assistance that's available for people.
And that can make such a big difference. I guess
Absolutely.
I'll keep telling stories, but my parents were young college graduates. They were both first in their families to finish college. And instead of coming home and trying to rent an apartment, this was in the late 40s, they went to live with my mother's parents. And they stayed there for 5 or 6 years, and they saved up enough money. They purchased the home that my grandparents had been renting for most of my mother's life.
Wow.
And that gave them a little bit of a head start. I laugh and I say, and they got me a house and a car all in the same year.
That's a lot.
They had a little bit of a head start from living with her parents and also purchasing the home. And so that sort of kick-started something different,
Right.
different for them. And that can still happen. We're just so, people say that voting doesn't matter and it doesn't matter who's in office. I just get so sad because when you have people who think clearly and believe rightly, you can make a difference in the way people live. And clearly that's what you and Madam Secretary are up to over there at HUD.
I certainly can't tell people how to vote sitting across from you in my current capacity, but I can certainly say that people need to vote for what they believe in. Vote for what they believe in, and if you believe that supporting these kinds of programs, supporting home, supporting community development, supporting the things that are helping folks who have been left out of mainstream America for a long time, then voting what you believe in. And I'll leave that there.
A word to the wise is sufficient. You told us about home and community development block grants. One of the things that we think about is everything now is looked at through a lens of equity and making sure that not only are we doing the right thing, but that we're doing it in a fair and equitable way. How does HUD think about the question of equity and righting historic wrongs?
Well, I will say, we have a new strategic plan that covers 2022 to 2026. So most of the secretary's tenure. And there's 2 overarching themes in that. One is equity, and the other is strong customer service. And we believe in both of them very, very deeply. I touched on a little bit of some of the ways that we're looking at our making sure our programs are distributed and available to individuals in an equitable way. We talked about what we can do with appraisal bias. That is looking at our homeownership process in a way that looking at the inequities across the whole ecosystem. We're looking at ways to make sure that we're removing barriers so that individuals can, get access to homeownership. But I'll also say this much. Equity also speaks to folks who are barely getting by. They're just barely getting by. And many of the folks who are barely getting by in this country, are Black and brown. And so we look at how we are using our fair housing. So one of the many things that HUD does is that, we're the folks that administer the Fair Housing Act. Like that sits with us as well. And, when folks are feeling discriminated against, when people are showing up to apply for a home and all of a sudden the home's been sold or there's a contract on it already and that's not the case because your white friend showed up and they, opened up the doors to them. When those things happen, it is continuing the discrimination in this country that has been in place for just hundreds of years. And so we look at our fair housing work, we are saying to all folks who are being discriminated against and who are being treated inequitably, there's our resources that we have for down payment. There's the resources that we have to help you, pay your rent. But the flip side of that, when you have those resources, is when are the doors closing in your face, when you know those doors are closing on your face because of who you are and how you look. And we have a tool for that. We got an app for that as well, which is which is our Fair Housing Act. And and we have some folks who are there who are dogged, not just here in Washington, D.C., but across the country, who said we are not going to have that in this America these days. And I don't have to tell this audience it's happening. It happens all the time, happened today. But we have the mechanism as well to make sure that folks who are doing that and keeping folks locked out of whether it's homeownership or being able to rent a home from a landlord, that we're able to respond to that legally with the tools that we have as well.
If you suspect that you might have been subject to housing discrimination, is there a process to report it to HUD? Is there a regional office? How does that work?
If you go to HUD.gov, HUD.gov, one of the first things that will come up is, the ways that you can interact with HUD. It will say, do you need rental assistance? Are you looking for homeownership assistance? It will also say, have you been discriminated against? So if you go to HUD.gov, you will be able to just do a drop-down menu, find that, and it will tell you the number to call. We have an intake complaint, but also we all have offices in I'm not going to get into much a HUD geek. I was going to give acronyms, but we have offices either at the federal buildings where HUD is located, but also with the local cities and nonprofits. Our nonprofits who also are intake for these complaints as well.
Wonderful. And if you have any difficulty navigating the website, call us at NCNW and we'll figure it out together. I don't promise that I know, but I promise you we'll help you figure it out. I want to stop now and see whether or not, well, no, there's one other topic I need to ask you about, Deputy Secretary. You've been so generous with your time. Talk to us about FHA. What is it? How does it help? Who's eligible for it? What's the benefit? What's the point? I bought a home and I thought I was going conventional. They said, no, you should go FHA and then you can do something else in a couple of years. And so far it's all worked out just like they told me it would.
There you go. That I like hearing that. So FHA is, our American homeowner insurance tool. And I say that because it belongs to all of us. And it again sits inside of HUD. What FHA does is it helps first-time homeowners. It helps homeowners who maybe your parents didn't have a home and you can't help you navigate. It helps homeowners who may not have a lot of money to put down for down payment payments in terms of reducing your down payment expectation. It helps all of these categories able to access home ownership. And most of the folks who are receiving our home ownership insurance are first-time home buyers, are moderate income individuals, and are people who are Black, Latino, et cetera, et cetera. And there's about 7.2 million households across the country who are insured by FHA right now. And what it basically says to the bank or the lender, comes as a non-bank lender, it says, look, Adrienne is creditworthy. She's got a steady job. She can pay her mortgage. And maybe she doesn't have a lot of money to put down for down payment assistance, but we are going to backstop Adrienne. We are going to say, we're going to bet on Adrienne being a homeowner. We believe that she's going to be able to purchase that home and keep those payments. And we're going to insure her mortgage. And when lenders hear that, it means that it's protecting them as well. And they feel more able, they feel like taking on the risk of a first-time homeowner who've never done this before, and they're backing that first-time homeowner's sort of ability, and they insure the mortgage. And so most lenders will encourage folks to get FHA insurance because it makes it easier for them, the lender, to then provide the mortgage because of some of their underwriting rules. And also the down payment expectation for an FHA insured home tends to be lower than if you go into a conventional lender or banking institution.
So it makes it more affordable, and you may not have to go into your savings as deeply in order to come up with the down payment. So you got, there's a rainy day, there's a little bit of the rainy day fund if you haven't put it all into the.
That's right. That's right. It's an amazing tool. It has been around as long as HUD has been around. And I really encourage folks, again, who are wanting to be a homeowner or maybe have a child or a grandchild who are looking to access homeownership for the first time, is right after you speak to that housing counselor, know that FHA is a place that you can go to help insure your mortgage.
Well, I've learned so much this evening. Thank you. I want to see, Mr. Johannes, do we have any questions? Does the audience have any questions for Deputy
We
Secretary?
have a few questions. The first question is, I've been out of college for 30 years and I've been renting, never have bought a house. Where do I start?
Yeah, as I mentioned, go to HUD's website, hud.gov. I encourage you to locate a local housing counselor who can really help you navigate what the process is like, what the expectations are, what the opportunities are. It will speak to you about some of the programs I've spoken about that can help with down payment assistance or FHA insurance assistance, and really begin the process there, particularly if you don't have a friend or a family member who you like or trust to help navigate the process with you. The housing counselors, that is why we support them, is for that very reason. And you can find and get access to that if you go to our HUD.gov website.
Okay, the other question is it different in different states or is it across the board?
So homeownership will be different generally when you go from one locality to another locality. I mean, the basic premise, of course, is the same. The basic premise is the same, but our FHA insurance is across the country. In all the territories, in all 50 states, there's an opportunity to access a FHA lender. The only thing I will say is that not every lender participates in the FHA insurance program. So you want to make sure that you're finding a lender, a mortgage lender, who actually participates in FHA. That's the one thing to look for. If you have a local bank or a local credit union that you're used to doing business with, and you want to do your business with them, just ask them, you're FHA lender, and that can help give you a little indication on whether or not you want to go with that lender or not.
Well, that was actually the next question is, do credit unions also work with HUD?
They do. They absolutely do. Not all of them, but they do.
Do we have any other questions? Was that the last question, Mr. Johannes?
Unless some other pop up, that was the last question. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, Deputy Secretary Todman, thank you so much for enlightening us, for sharing your wisdom and your expertise with our audience tonight. I know that we're going to get all kinds of good comments, and I will share them with you. This program has been recorded, and in about a week or 10 days, you'll be able to access it if you want to see it again or invite family or friends to watch it. You can find it on our NCNW YouTube channel. We want to thank the audience for joining us tonight. There's always a lot going on, but we appreciate the fact that you spent some of your time with us this evening. Please take the time to fill out the survey so we know whether or not this met your needs and what you'd like for us to do next. We try very much to plan these programs and activities and events around what you want, not necessarily what we want to talk about, but what you find is valuable. If you're an NCNW member or supporter, consider attending the 60th National NCNW Convention, which will be December 1st through the 4th. First time we will have had a live convention, not just on the internet, since 2018. So we hope that you'll think about that. Tomorrow night, there's another webinar. This one is on affordable health care, and it is led by Shara Denton, who is co-chair of our National Health Equity Committee, along with Dr. Angelia Elgin. That's going to be a very informative session tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. If you're registered to attend the Congressional Black Caucus Week of Activities, there is a Vaccines and Votes webinar on Thursday at noon, sponsored by Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity, one of our partners in Good Health Wins, in room 146 of the Convention Center. So if you believe like we do that we're better together, that get the facts and boost the truth, plan your vote. Stay tuned for more information. This is your National Council of Negro Women. I'm Janice Mathis, Executive Director, and again, Deputy Secretary Todman. Thank you very much to you and your staff for being so accommodating. We appreciate it. Thank you all, and good night.